Hello and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining me again. My name is Wilkie and I am here with my complete Kung Fu Master guide, and what I will be talking over here is basically the core mechanics of the Kung Fu Master, how it works and what the basics are. Then I will be covering 3 different builds, I guess, in terms of delivering and dealing damage to the enemy. And finally, which is probably the most important part for most people watching this guide, is I will be talking over all the skill builds I use against all 7 matchups, given the fact that I use the 3RF combos. So obviously if you use a different build you can or have to translate that to your build, but basically I will show you my skill build against each class and give you a couple of things I learned so far. So without further ado, we are going to look at a polished skill tree. There's no skill points on, and basically what Kung Fu Master does is it revolves around chaining and combining your CCs in order to render the enemy stunned or dazed, preferably stunned, and then deliver either way of dealing damage to the enemy. And for that, what you need is the CC, the Daze, and Comet Strike, which are the 3 points here. Shin Kick, which is not actually a CC, but is required for something else. Tremor, 1 point, increases this unto 3 seconds. We are needing Flurry, 3 points, dazes for 2 seconds each hit. Key point about this skill is, though, if there are multiple enemies, the Daze or the Flurry will jump between all targets within a certain range. So for example, against summoners, it very often will happen that you will dash between Cat and Summoner back and forth, but you can cancel the skill at any point, so it doesn't really matter in case you want to stop at a specific enemy. But just so you know that this works a bit different. Rising Dragon, your second Fire on Will stun skill. You need 4 points into this skill, unfortunately, but as a 2-second stun, it pierces parry. It has a pretty decent HP recovery, so it's a pretty good skill in general. But as far as CC goes, this is pretty much all you need, and we're going to put 3 points into here. At least 1 point into this one, and at least 2 points into this one. Because depending on the enemy and depending on the build, we will change certain skills. And yeah, 2 points into Flying Slam, relatively good guard breaker, high DPS, a really good burst potential, and a follow-up onto air combos. Can catch people off guard really good. So I definitely recommend taking this one. And I think that is actually all for the core build. And like I said, you have 3 stuns. Triple Kick is one of the stuns that has a prerequisite. You need to dodge an enemy hit or a skill, or the enemy needs to be blocking or countering, which means for a Kung Fu Master, if I'm pressing 1, an enemy Kung Fu Master may very well come up to me and press right click to get the stun going. So, like I said, this is the core build. These are the skills you always want to take regardless of the build, regardless of the enemy you're fighting. This is really all I always use against all enemies. Now, I said initially there are 3 ways of dealing damage, and basically the first one is probably known to all of you, is the 3RF animation cancelling build. And the only thing we need to change for that is to put 3 points into Cyclone Kick, and that is pretty much all. I'm not going to cover Searing Palm because it basically does not really have anything to do with animation cancelling, but I'm going to do it slow. What you need to do is daze or stun the enemy, and once the enemy is dazed, you can use 3, R, which is your left mouse button, and then F, which is Cyclone Kick, which slowly looks something like this, 3RF. This was obviously not really an animation cancelling, but if you're looking a bit faster, so it looks like something like this. Or with this done 1, 2, 3 rotations. So it really is always the same. Daze or stun the enemy. We can do it with this one as well. 3RF. So it always works the same. Daze or stun the enemy. Use 3RF to deliver 2 hits to recover chi. because Cyclone Kick on the middle tree here, consumes 2 chi. So basically you're coming out of the equation with 0 focus gain, 0 focus lost, if you always go for the full rotation. So that is pretty simple how this works, and if done right, if cancelled properly at proper speed, this is really painful. It delivers really high DPS, probably the best DPS Kung Fu Master can do. I don't think it's the best DPS in-game, but given the fact how many stuns you can chain and how long you can keep it up, I'd say it's probably one of the best ways to DPS. That is pretty much how 3RF animation cancelling works. That is really simple. Now, we can go a bit less skillful, I guess. A lot of people are going to cringe now because they say it's not really a build. And I don't really agree with that. It is a build, it's just less skill dependent. It's certainly not even half as much fun as animation cancelling, but it still works. And what is, I guess, a good thing is it even works if your connection is not terribly good. Now the only thing I really changed is I took out skill points out of this. It didn't even have to do it, but since we are not going to use Cyclone Kick, I might as well get these skill points. And now what we're going to do is, a lot of you have guessed it, we're just gonna hammer 3. Like, this is really all it is. You're just gonna spam 3. You usually get 4 to 5 shin kicks in, and this is really all it boils down to. That is pretty much why I said this is a really simplified build. It has nothing to do with cancelling. The general DPS may be a bit lower, but like I said, it's absolutely not dependent on your skill level of how good you can cancel, because really all it is just pressing 3. That's why I said it's not really the most entertaining build. A lot of people are maybe flipping your shit if you use this build because they are saying you're not playing it properly, or you're losing, or you're using a lame mechanic, which is true at some points, but it works. So I would classify it as a build that works, and I've seen Platinum Kung Fu Masters that actually used this build, so there are actually people using this, and I don't see why you shouldn't do it if you are content with the idea. Now onto the third build, which is going to be a bit different, and we definitely need Searing Palm, and the left tree for that is we are going to use Shin Kick, because if you look at this description here, after using Ankle Cracker tier, which is Shin Kick, you can look at the icon, it allows you to use Searing Palm, and the way Searing Palm, the left tree, works is basically this skill is tiered up into 4 tiers, and what we're going to do is rotate all our dazes and CCs, and then squeeze in the Searing Palm. What this looks like is going to be daze, 3x, 3x, and we're just going to follow up with another stun 3. I'm doing it a bit shorter and slower to actually figure out what happens, and another 4 hits, and then Leading Palm at the end. Now what this did basically was using Searing Palm 4 times, and then using Leading Palm at the end, dealing 4 times the damage it usually does, which obviously the numbers you've just seen weren't really that great because I'm using a broken weapon to not kill the pig. But in PvP, if used in conclusion with the buff we're getting, or we received this patch, you can deal up to 10k crits if you're using this build, which is really deadly, and it can hurt quite a bit if done correctly. The only downside I have with this build is that compared to the other Cyclone Kick build, you don't have another 2-second stun because you, in most cases, will be using this Searing Palm. And the other thing is, this skill has a 1-minute cooldown, so if you screw up any of the stages, or the enemy stuns you, or something else happens, you actually cannot access the buff or the skill for at least 50 seconds or whenever you drop the combo. So this is kind of tricky, and you need to pay attention when to use it to make sure you don't screw it up and don't lose the benefit of using this skill. Yeah, this is pretty much all about the 3 ways of DPSing, I guess. The other thing is you can still always just hammer 3 with this build, it still works. But the main DPS will be driving through Searing Palm in this build. Now, those 3 damage options you have are pretty much the ones I wanted to talk about, and yeah, I guess we'll just start over talking about the first build. The first matchup, I'm going to start with the Kung Fu Master versus Kung Fu Master, so the mirror match. And like I said initially, I'm currently using the 3RF build, so I will roll this one here. What else do we have? We're going to change Searing Palm into the right one for an additional 2-second stun. We want to spec the second point into the second wind to give us an additional daze, which can be really helpful and a really good tool to punish enemies if they waste their stuns or use it at the wrong point. You can actually punish and in some occasions even turn around the game and win the round if you follow up with this. What else? Since I don't see the need of Ice Guard against the Kung Fu Master, there's not really anything you cannot protect yourself against except for the Flying Slam, but even that is dodgeable with an iframe. I prefer the Fighting Spirit buff simply because this buff literally lets you tear things apart. If you have a stun chain going and you manage to use the buff before you launch the stun chain and you don't screw up any canceling or anything, you are guaranteed to kill the enemy. If you follow up with a 7-second stun while this buff is on and you cancel halfway properly, every enemy is going to die. I swear, this is a really tremendous DPS buff we received with this patch. If you manage to use this buff properly before a stun combo, this is usually a guaranteed kill for you. And for the last 2 points, we are going for counter. The reason here is on successful skill resist stun and daze for 2 seconds, which is really strong obviously, because it literally protects you from those two type of CCs for 2 seconds after a stun, after a counter, my bad. So this is really helpful. And this is pretty much the way I roll against the Kung Fu Master. Like I said, I'm pretty sure there are other builds. Some people like using Ice Guard. You may want to respec and not use 3RF, but use the other build. That is really optional, whichever way you prefer. But this is the way I fight against Kung Fu Masters, and I find it works relatively well. In case you find yourself having trouble and not being able to deal with all their offensive and kind of having trouble to defend yourself, you can always switch over to Ice Guard, which is a relatively good defensive skill and can be used offensively, because if you use it, if the enemy is near, you will freeze him and lock his camera into one direction. Pretty much what happens all the time if you fight against a Force Master. But if you lock a Kung Fu Master in that one direction and he doesn't have any of his abilities left to get out of it, you can actually pretty freely attack him for a few seconds. Yeah, anyways, like I said, this is pretty much the matchup for Kung Fu Master. Covering the next class, I will be showing you how I go against the Destroyer, and that is probably not surprising for many people, pretty much the exact same. There is no reason for me, at least in the playstyle I use, which is the 3RF one, to change my skill build, since the Ice Teeth can be used to defend against the spin, but you have relatively good tools to either circle around in iframes or simply get room between you and the Destroyer to not get spin to wind, which I preferably keep the skill on Fighting Spirit simply to give me the option to burst him down whenever I get the chance. The reason for that is that if Destroyers play with her Adamant build, which is like a defensive type of build, they get a second tool to escape from your stuns, which makes it relatively hard to lock them down in a full stun chain. So you may want to burst as hard and as quick as possible if you get the opportunity to, which is pretty much the reason why I like using this skill. And for anything else, it pretty much works just the same. CC stays the same. There's absolutely, at least the way I play, no reason for me to change anything against Destroyers. We're going against the third matchup, which in my occasion here is the Assassin. Now this one is a bit trickier, because you certainly want to go for the Frost Sheath or Ice Guard, which is called here. But other than that, here's the deal. I know people using elbow counter or elbow smash. I'm not really a fan of this skill, so I don't like it, but if you're comfortable or you're willing to try something new, there's definitely an option for you to use elbow smash, but I simply prefer counter, although the stun and daze resistance in most cases doesn't help that much. It still proved useful for me, so I prefer keeping it this way. And for the rest, it pretty much remains the same. Stuns, dazes all remain the same. The keynote about assassins is probably to learn when to tap, how to read their movements, and to know what they can do in stealth, what they cannot do in stealth, and what their prerequisites are. For example, assassins have a lot of stealth, they have a lot of stuns and dazes, but most of them require them either to be invis, behind you, have you marked, and if you know how these work and how the differences between the stuns and dazes work, you actually have a relatively decent chance to catch them. And probably what most people do not know is, for example, leg sweep is pretty good for knocking them down out of stealth, because if you CC them inside their stealth, they are actually getting visible. So you can counter the invisibility of your assassin. However, it may be risky and you may waste one of your cooldowns, but keep that in the back of your head. If you're under pressure or almost dead anyway, you may want to go all out and use some of your AoE skills or other skills in order to maybe get a lucky shot in and maybe even turn around the game in your favor. Now for the fourth class, we're going to talk about the skill build against Blade Master. Now this is really between the lines. I prefer using Fighting Spirit for the same reason as I did against Destroyers and other Kung Fu Masters. It simply gives me a much better tool to kill an enemy if I finally get a stun combo off. I see a lot of people using Ice Guard though. This is really an optional thing here, whatever you prefer. Ice Guard leaves you a lot more defensive, gives you a better tool to defend yourself, and it also has only a third of the cooldown the Fighting Spirit has, which it also works as a chi recovery tool, so it certainly isn't that bad of a skill, but I prefer Fighting Spirit. So against Blade Masters, this is the skill build I'm using. Up to the fifth matchup, we are going to talk about Blade Dancers, or as commonly also known as Blade Cancers. Which is, yeah, I guess I know, a lot of people are actually having trouble against them and don't like their spin to win playstyle. But the key difference here is you will want to use Ice Guard. However, if you feel yourself comfortable dodging all of their moves and not needing another defensive, you can always switch this back to Fighting Spirit for sad reasons, which I already mentioned a couple times, since if done right and if caught out of escapes, you can kill whoever you want, even Destroyers at full HP. So for Blade Dancers, I prefer using Ice Guard, simply to have an option to close the gap between their barrier, which protects them for 5 hits or 5 seconds, and you kind of leaving you there, not being able to attack, use any CC, but still kind of being open and vulnerable to attacks. So this actually may be a good thing to close the gap between their defensive and your defensive. Going to the second last matchup, this is going to be the Summoner, and this is actually where the build changes a slight bit. One of the key changes is you are going to change your second wind to allow you to escape from grabs, grapples, and phantom grips. The reason being is what's dangerous, or what's one of the most dangerous things about the Summoner is the cat, but not the cat itself, but the ability for the cat to grab you. Because the frame to escape off the grab is really short, and in most cases you do not want to rely onto your 2 skill, which is slip kick exactly, because it really is an insanely short amount of time you have to press it to escape the cat's grab, and if you fail to, in the worst case, a Summoner may kill you or almost kill you in the grab. So You want to avoid the grab, and you can do this by having another point, but not into the daze one, but allowing you to escape grabs and grapples, because that's exactly what the cat does to you, and this allows you to escape even if you fail anything else. Ice Guard, some people like using it. I'm not a fan of it simply because you have plenty iframes and your counter and your backdash and whatever else to usually allow yourself to maintain either a couple stacks of evasion or even a full stack to usually maneuver right around the cat and the summoner. Once you get to know how summoner and the cat works, it's actually not that hard to avoid things because you can actually see them and anticipate them really well, at least for the stuns and dazes. Anything else is not really that hard to anticipate, but these major skills you want to avoid are actually kind of easy to read, and the cat is, after all, also AI controlled, so it's sometimes really easy to read what the cat is going to do. The other change is going to be Searing Palm in the left tree. Now, like I said, there are people that are confident in their skills and they like using the right tree. The reason why I don't like it and why I think it should not be used against the summoner is the following. Both Rising Dragon and Tremor are AoE stuns, so, and even Comet Strike is an AoE stun, Flurry jumps between the enemies, so if done right, you can CC both the summoner and the cat. However, Searing Palm is a debuff you place on your enemy, which stuns the enemy which is marked for another 2 seconds, meaning you either have to mark the cat or the summoner. Stunning both with Searing Palm is not possible. So what this leaves you at is kinda a chance to either for the summoner punish you or the cat to punish you after the regular CC is worn off and the Searing Palm triggers. So I prefer using Searing Palm because it gives you a hefty DPS boost if done right. I've seen, like I said, I have a matchup where I dealt a 10k leading palm crit, which literally halfway killed the cat and the summoner because it has a slight AoE. So I think this is really the best way to go against the summoner. The only thing that may be optional for you is to go Ice Guard to protect yourself. But basically, this works the best for me. This also allows me to either take down the cat or the summoner. It really depends on the summoner. Some summoners are really good at defending their pet. Some summoners don't care too much about their cat and they let you kill it in a couple of seconds in some cases. So it really depends on the type of summoner, its skill build, and the way it plays. But basically against the summoner, I recommend using this build. Going on to the final matchup, which is going to be Force Master. Disclaimer right off, this is by far the hardest class for me to fight as a Kung Fu Master. I virtually have not figured out a safe and proof way to deal with everything they have, so it's always a gamble of how good the Force Master actually is and if he knows how to chain the CC they have and how to bait your counters. And if they do, it's insanely hard for me to win against any halfway decent Force Master. However, the skill build I use, and this is, like I said, this is sort of experimental. I'm not exactly sure if I should be doing this that way, but what I'm doing against the Force Master is using the Searing Palm one, the one with the 2-second extra stun. I'm taking out all the points of my counter because I rarely ever have seen the resist protect me against Force Masters. What I also do is I take out 1 point of second wind. The first one being is usually Force Masters stun you on range, so having a daze effect on your escape is in most cases not going to be useful anyway because you're not hitting anything. And escaping from a grab may be optional, but usually they prior to the grab they use a pretty damaging stun combo, and you will want to avoid this first before trying to avoid the grab. So this is the way I use it. I also use Ice Guard because I really have trouble defending myself against them. If they freeze me and my backdash is on cooldown, I'm pretty screwed, to be honest. So this gives me another 3 seconds, and if triggered even more, to be protected. For the 3 skill points we have remaining, we are going for Avenging Fist. And now we're going for the middle tree. The reason is, Avenging Fist basically does not work at all if you haven't even put 1 skill point into it. If you have 1 point into it, it will allow you to be used after a counter. The second branch here, the third one, purges immobility. This is really vital for me, because what this does is, if I successfully counter, I can use this skill which removes and purges any immobility skills, which means I can use all of my dashes, all of my jumps, because the freezing and the frostbite the Force Masters pester you with will be removed. Now keep in mind, this skill has an 80-second cooldown, so it's not like you can spam this all the time, and also you need to successfully counter first. So this is only at least one way I found to gap close, because once they freeze you or put frostbite onto you, almost all of your dashing skills, engages, jumping skills are disabled because you're frozen. So this is one of the 2 that do actually work even while frozen, or rather this one purges anything, allowing you to follow up with any other charge or engage. So this is pretty much the main reason why I use Avenging Fist against Force Master. Like I said, this is really an experimental build. I haven't figured out a proper way to deal with them yet. Maybe there is none. I've seen a lot of people saying that Force Masters are a pretty hard counter for Kung Fu Master, and I can see why. I mean, I'm the only class without any ranged ability, and once I'm frozen, things are getting ugly really, really quick, so it's not a nice matchup, I have to admit that. But yeah, like I said, this is the way I play against Force Masters. Now, concluding this guide, I'm probably talking about for over 40 minutes, I'm really sorry about that. I also put all the skill builds into the description using BNS tree, so you can look it up really quickly without having to bother with all of the explanation and things I'm doing. So in case you wanna simply look at the skill build I'm using without any explanation, click any of the links in the description. And yeah, like I said initially, if you wanna know something else, or if you're kind of confused as to your build working, or you're using anything else, maybe you want to ask me something else, feel free to do so. I will gladly try to help you out figuring out your skill build, or maybe things that are working for you. And hopefully this helped some of you guys getting at least a brief idea of how Kung Fu Master works, how they can play versus certain classes. And yeah, thanks everybody for sticking around if you watched the whole thing. Like I said, it was pretty damn long. And yeah, as always, see ya.